Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Stayton City Council. It is Monday, the 18th of March, 2019. I'm going to call the meeting to order, and would you please join me in a flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Well, the council's here and the staff is here. And do we have any additions to the agenda? If not, are there any declarations of ex parte contact, conflict of interest, bias? No? Nothing? Okay. Presentations, comments from the public. And we have one tonight to start with, Samantha Jones. Would you? Darren.
Good evening, Council. I'm here again on Ordinance 1019. Now, I know that we set up a committee to we're supposed to rectify a problem, and I'm not seeing that happen. What I'm seeing is a bigger problem happening, going from 10 feet to 20 feet. You're going to put people out of business. I went to the other bars and looked at their smoking areas and have spoke with some of the owners, and I really wish that you would take this into consideration. And when you guys are supposed to, they're going to recommend that you do a survey. I recommend that your survey go to the business owners that are going to be affected by this. If we're really trying to grow Stayton, then why are we putting viable businesses that have been in business for years, in our case 77 years, why would you want to put them out of business with this? I'm not understanding that.
Well, we certainly hear you, Samantha. Would anyone care to respond to that? We've got that committee is an active one. It's met, what, twice?
I've been to the meetings 3 times.
3 times?
I missed the last one due to weather.
Okay. I think they're working on revisions to that ordinance.
Well, they've already got the draft done and ready to present to the council, but I wanted to come and talk to the council. You know, they're going to ask for you to do a survey, and you know, if it's anything like the last survey where the people that were affected by it or are going to be affected by it were not even addressed.
Okay. Anything? I'm sorry?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so I guess we're waiting to see those recommendations, Samantha.
Okay.
All right, and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else need to address the council at this time? Okay. Let's go to the consent agenda then for March 4th, 2019. And you folks have seen it, I hope. And what would you like to do with it?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I'll offer a motion to accept the consent agenda as submitted.
Seconded.
Okay, I've got a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda as presented. If you've looked at it, all in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Hearing none, we'll declare that passed. And the consent agenda will be accepted. And we go into, is the first thing this appointment?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, it is. Public Safety Commission. Appointments. Dave Valencia, a well-known figure in the community, has a State Farm agency up on First Avenue. And person Diana Mall to the library board. And apparently she has been a volunteer there for how many years? September of '04. What is that? 14, 15 years?
15 years.
Almost 15 years? Wow, okay. So if you folks have looked at those and can concur with my appointment, I would like to appoint Dave Valencia and to the Public Safety Commission and Diana Mall to the Library Board.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, all right.
Seconded.
A motion and a second to affirm those appointments. Would all in favor say aye on that, please?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. I guess I should have asked for comments, but I didn't, so we'll go on. Public hearing. Oh, we have ordinance number 1029, amending land use code establishing standards for recreation vehicle parks and campgrounds. And if I know Mr. Fleischman, he will have one of these for me to read. Am I right? I'm right. It's right here. A script to be read at the commencement of a public hearing. Good evening. My name is Henry Porter. As mayor, I'll be presiding over this hearing. This is the time and place set for the public hearing in the matter of land use file number 23-12-18 or /18, excuse me, concerning legislative amendments to the Land Use and Development Code establishing standards for recreational vehicle parks and campgrounds. The hearing is now open. At the back counter is the agenda for this evening's meeting, which lays out the order in which people will be called on to speak during the public hearing. Copies of the proposed map amendments, the city's rules of procedure for land use public hearings, and a brochure written to facilitate your participation in the public hearing. You're encouraged to obtain and read a copy of these documents as well. At this time, I would ask the audience if there are any objections to the notice for this hearing. I hear none. To the jurisdiction of this body to hear and consider this case. I hear none. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest, ex parte contact, or bias by any members of this body?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I just want to state that I was on the Planning Commission when we had a potential developer have interest in building a type of recreational vehicle park. So, but that won't influence my decision.
All right. Thank you. When it's your turn to speak, please state your name and address for the record. As a participant in the hearing, the city is required to notify you of the final results of the process. We are now ready for the staff report. Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The issue before you is a public hearing, as the opening statement said, on legislative amendments to the Land Use and Development Code that would establish development standards for recreational vehicle parks and campgrounds. They also make some adjustments to the regulation of what can be parked or stored outside on a residential lot. I'll get into them in a little bit. Following the public hearing, you'll be presented with Ordinance 1029 for your first consideration as to whether to enact and adopt these regulations. Currently, our land use code allows RV parks and campgrounds as a permitted use after site plan review in our interchange development zone and in our industrial agriculture zone. However, our code does not have any standards for their development. If we were to receive an application to develop an RV park, we would have only the general standards applicable to site plan review with which to review it. So adopting standards allows the city to set out the parameters for the development of an RV park or campground within the city limits. The city has not received an application for the development of an RV park. However, as Councilor Hook indicated, the Planning Commission was approached by someone who has expressed interest in doing so, and that is what sparked the Planning Commission to initiate this process. When we realized that we've got a permitted use that we don't have any standards, design standards or operational standards for. The Planning Commission probably discussed this topic at 5 different meetings. They looked at a number of different issues and options, including in which zones RV parks and campgrounds should be permitted in. They ended up choosing not to change the code and to continue to allow them in the interchange development zone and industrial agricultural zone only. They looked at restrictions on the length of stay in an RV park, on what types of units should be allowed. They even considered in their deliberations whether to allow RVs, recreational vehicles, to be located in a mobile home park, which is a residential use as opposed to a commercial use. The end result of their deliberations is the package of amendments that you have in front of you. They were crafted after we looked at the standards from a couple of communities in Oregon and a couple of communities in other states. And as I said, they talked about this at, I think, 5 or 6 different meetings before setting a date for a public hearing. They held their public hearing at their January meeting. Following the public hearing, as a result of the testimony they heard at the public hearing, they made further revisions to the regulations, and at their February meeting, forward them to you for your consideration tonight. There are 4 different parts to the proposed amendment that you have in front of you. The first thing is that the definition of the term recreational vehicle is amended. As currently in our code, the term recreational vehicle includes a number of items that most people wouldn't think of as an RV, such as boats, snowmobiles, jet skis, and trailers for hauling your boat or your jet skis around, etc. So the Planning Commission has recommended that the definition of RV be changed to mean a recreational vehicle, a motor vehicle that is either self-propelled or towed behind another vehicle that is designed for camping, so to speak, and not include these other things. As a result of that change in definition, because our code currently restricts how many recreational vehicles you can have parked in your yard on a residential lot, and the Planning Commission felt it was important to continue that restriction, a new term is defined by the amendments that have before you, and that is recreational personal property. And that is defined as all of these other things that are currently called recreational vehicle, so that we continue to limit the number of toys that you can store in your yard or driveway. The third change is to amend those parking and restrictions that are currently in the code to include reference to recreational personal property in addition to recreational vehicles. So those are the first 3 parts of the amendment as before you. And the 4th part is to establish the design and operational standards for RV parks and campgrounds. I won't go into all of the detail, but among the standards lay out how a minimum area that a parcel needs to have in order to be established as an RV park, no less than 3 acres in area, It requires that individual spaces in the park be not less than 1,500 square feet and have a width of no less than 30 feet. Except that if there's areas that are designated for tenting only, then they can be smaller. It requires a minimum of separation of at least 25 feet between RVs within a park. It requires the establishment of a buffer around the perimeter of the park, requirements for vegetation. It sets out the standards for the width of the vehicular ways. They're not really streets, but where cars and trucks and RVs will drive throughout the park, etc. Also, as I said earlier, the Planning Commission deliberated quite a bit about the issue of, well, if these are commercial, we consider an RV park to be a commercial use, not a residential use. And so there was concern about what types of limits need to be in place to assure that people are not going to live there. It's not going to become someone's residence, year-round residence. So the Planning Commission looked at a couple of things and finally ended up with a recommendation that the code limit the length of stay of any customer to no more than 180 consecutive days. And the code, as presented to you, would require that someone, check out, leave, go away for at least a week before checking back in. There are also other operational standards requiring, certain number of trash containers, fire extinguishers, things like that are in the code. And again, I won't go through all the detail of what's in here, but it's partly, as I said, modeled on other communities' codes. It's also partly modeled on what's in our code today for recreational, for mobile home parks, as far as just the structure of the code, having the submission requirements, the design standards, and the operational standards. So with that, I will answer any questions you have before we turn it over to public testimony.
Questions from the council? Thank you, Dan. Go ahead. Somebody. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Dan, I noticed that in a couple places you've amended this and added temporary. Is that basically just specifying the 180-day consecutive limit in the actual ordinance copy here on the first page under section 2, defining the recreational vehicle? And then also later on on number 3 under section 3, subsection 6 of B, it's long-term occupancy added there. Is that again also just accounting for the 180 consecutive days instead of some kind of permanent living situation in those recreational vehicles?
Yes, that was the intent. The code,
Okay.
The code's current definition of recreational vehicles says that it is, and its language the Planning Commission has suggested deleting, but it says it's designed for vacation and recreational purposes, but not a permanent residence. So that was, shall we say, made more concise by just saying it is intended for temporary occupancy.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you. I was just curious
Yep.
about that.
Somebody else?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Dan, who's going to enforce the 180-day rule?
That will be a combination of the planning department and the police department. And it will really be, if we see that it looks like someone's there for longer, should one be developed, that someone's there all winter type thing, then we'll have, as a transient accommodation, they'll need to keep records of when people check in and check out, and we'll have the ability to get those records.
So because we have the code in place, it won't become a civil matter between the property manager and the tenant?
It may be that, should a tenant refuse to leave.
Correct.
But otherwise, it would be a it would be an enforcement matter if we find that that or any other operational standard is being violated.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, other questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Dan, how close are these standards that you put in here to the ones that you guys were reviewing? Are they pretty similar? Did you pull directly from any of them, or?
We pulled directly from a number of other communities.
Okay.
The end result, you may not be able to find the exact same standard in any other community. The proposal that went to public hearing, for instance, had a larger minimum site area and site width, but there was testimony at the public hearing, and the Planning Commission, in response to that testimony, changed those numbers.
Okay. Mr. Mayor?
Someone else?
I have another question, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, another one. Go ahead.
Is there anywhere in here, I didn't see it, so I just want to make sure that I didn't, not read correctly. Is there anywhere in here where it says that the city, in some capacity, whether that's the planning department or the enforcement, will be checking those records periodically to make sure that no one is staying over the amount that they're supposed to? I'm concerned. My reason is I'm concerned about 180 days. First off, that's a long time, and I don't think that there's any standards for insulation on these RVs, which is concerning in the wintertime. We have to think about the safety of our residents as well.
There is nothing in the proposed code that mandates either that city staff look at the records or that the records be submitted to the city. There's just the limit that is set. And as I said in response to the earlier question, I think that would be a matter of doing occasional drive-bys and seeing if it appears someone is really living there and not vacationing.
Another question?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes. Council.
So to kind of follow up with what Councilor Hook and Councilor Quigley was saying, so is it not the property owner, are they not in charge of this recreational facility or this campground? Is that not their?
No, they definitely are in charge.
Okay.
I mean, and
so if they're
and
taking people's money and they're doing these things, that's who someone should go to if they have issues, or if they say, hey, somebody's living here or staying here too long.
Yes, it would be the park operator or park
Okay.
owner that the city would contact should we believe that there's any violation of any of these standards.
So they should be enforcing it first?
Yes.
Okay. And then a follow-up question?
Go ahead, please.
So for Section 3 in the residential areas where this is edited, so how is this enforced? Is this just by complaint basis, or?
It is enforced by our code officers as all of the rest of our code is enforced. They are supposed to be out doing occasional drive-bys through neighborhoods. When I was in charge of enforcement a few years ago, if I saw somebody had 4 or 5 toys parked in the driveway, they got a letter saying, hey, you're only allowed 3, either remove them from the lot or get them in your garage.
Okay.
So it would be the same. Or complaints would come in and the code officers would go out and check out the situation.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, let's go to public testimony then. Who would like to start?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. My name is Mark Grins, and I'm with Multitech Engineering. Our office is at 1155 13th Street Southeast in Salem, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide some testimony to you before on this ordinance. Specifically, we're here asking that you would approve Ordinance 1029 as the Planning Commission has recommended it to you. When we came before the Planning Commission, we provided testimony to them based on designs that we have put together and personal experience. So I provided you with a handout, which is the same material that went to the Planning Commission. And I'm an RVer, and the first picture in there is my rig. So I have a pretty good sized rig. So when I do design and layout for a recreational vehicle park, I always think of that in terms of my coach and where I've been and what it takes to maneuver my coach around and to get in and out of spaces to make it work. So the park that I like really well, that I think works very well, is one that I've put in here and pictures for you. It's the Pheasant Rig RV Park. It's up at Wilsonville. It's on the north end of Wilsonville. It's a very nice park. I like to go there. And so I use that as a basis for, and I have used it for basis for some spaces and parks that I've laid out. And I put in here some drawings or some pictures where I put some dimensions, some lines on, so that you'd be able to see what types of dimensions exist in that park in terms of space widths and space lengths and parking areas in there. Because, like I said, my rig is 40 feet long, and so I don't go places more than once that I can't maneuver in, that I don't feel comfortable in. So these spaces are nice widths, they're nice lengths, they have a nice landscape area on each of them, and so this is what we use as our testimony to the Planning Commission, and for the most part what the Planning Commission listened to what we had to say, and that was utilized in addition to the other things that staff had put in there that's together. So part of these is in the back was to show, the last couple of pictures to show how my electrical system connects and how my plumbing connects, because one of the things that was being talked about originally was requiring that the facilities had to be hard plumbed or hardwired in, and it just doesn't work for RVs to do that, at least the modern ones that are there. So most of the RVs that you would find in RV parks today are reasonably well built, are set up to be located in conditions that are wet, cold. They have self-contained heating systems and stuff, and most of the plumbing systems are heated by way of the heating systems that's in the coach, other than the small part that leads out to the connection to the faucet or that. And those are usually, I take some temporary insulation I put around mine if that's what I'm going to be in a park when it's cold weather. But anyway, I just wanted you to know I'm happy to answer questions about it, but like I said, it is based on my personal experience. There are parks that I would not go back to because I just can't either get into them comfortably or I can't maneuver comfortably. But this is the standards that the Planning Commission recommended to you are ones that are good, that big rigs can get into, and I think that's what most RV parks are hoping to attract, is big rigs that are nice looking and that would be an attraction to the community as opposed to a detriment. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Who wants to start? Well, I will then. Mark, given these standards that are being asked to be adopted, kind of park you envision not hard to meet those?
No, like I said, the standards that you have are just are very much the same as the ones that the Pheasant Ridge Park is modeled after. A lot of communities don't have specific standards that the RV parks have to be set up for. There's criteria that you're trying to achieve for maneuverability, for travel areas, and for setbacks and stuff. But your standards have gone a little bit further than that. But that's great. So like I said, if you took your standards, you'd end up with something that's very similar to the Pheasant Ridge Park, which I think which again, like I think is a really nice park. Nice. It's not too tight together. You got good maneuverability and stuff. So,
Mark, how do the state parks compare?
they're
As
much.
far as maneuverability and whatnot for these?
They're much more condensed.
Right.
I take my coach, my family gets together over at South Beach at Newport every
Okay.
summer, and my coach goes over there, but I have to be very selective in the spaces that I would sign up for to get my coaching, because they're much tighter, narrower, shorter. The units are a lot, can end up being a lot
Right.
closer together. So these standards here will put the units apart a little bit more than that. So.
Okay, that's fine. That's me. Someone else?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you, by the way, for the information. I want to pick your brain on this one a little bit, because I
Sure.
see in our code that we are, for a one-way, we're only doing 14 feet versus the 16 width on this map. With a 40-foot vehicle like what you have, is that 2 feet going to make a difference?
I can maneuver, so the dimensions from Pheasant Ridge are what I showed you there. I can maneuver in less than that, but that's I think 14 feet is the minimum. If I were laying a park out, I'd probably be laying out a little bit wider, the streets out a little bit wider than that. But you can make that work. I think what you have to do is take into account how long the space is and how wide the throat is. So if you notice on the pictures of the close-ups there, you see the throats coming in and out or flared. So that's usually what makes the ability to get in and out of there. That makes more difference than does the width of the pavement itself. It's just how rapidly can I make that turn and not end up in the grass or in the landscaping. So.
Other questions?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Same type of question. The width of the entire lot, like the space between each RV space is like 30 feet wide, but in our code, we're proposing only 25 feet.
Now, your code sets out a minimum of 30-foot width and a minimum of 20-foot of spacing between RVs. So that would actually make the spaces end up being slightly about 5 feet wider than what I have shown that exists up at Pheasant Ridge.
So Dan, I'm looking in number 4, line F, that it says that recreational vehicles shall not be located closer than 25 feet from any other recreational vehicle or permanent building within the recreational vehicle park. So that would be the spacing between, right?
That would be the spacing between vehicles. But the
okay.
code also requires that the individual spaces laid out on the plan be no less than 30 feet wide in paragraph B, 4B.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's all.
Other questions? I think we're good for now, Mark.
I do.
Thank you.
Could I, Mr. Mayor?
Well, jump in there, come on. Other questions?
Is there, so with the park up in Woodburn, is there anything about this one that, like you said, this is a good plan. So is there anything that would you say would be missing from this park as
From your
opposed to that one?
standards, as opposed to that? No, like I said, your standards, you have good standards. They would, the Pheasant Ridge Park would fit in your standards. The space, like I said, the spaces would be a few feet wider, but they'd all fit in there. So and the clubhouse is asked to be within 500 feet of all the spaces. So it's kind of in the center, kind of like that picture, the overall picture of the Pheasant Ridge is kind of follows that same model. Trash enclosure, trash locations spread out around the space. We did make recommendations which the Planning Commission had took relative to the number of extra parking spaces based on so many per space for up to 100 spaces, and then so many for the per space for additional beyond that, because most people that come to RV parks don't have extra vehicles. I tow a car behind mine. So in that 60-some feet or so that a space would have, would be my coach and my car parked behind it in that space. So that's how, and if someone has a pickup that's pulling a nice travel trailer, same thing. Usually that's, so you don't need a lot of extra visitor parking and stuff. Visitor parking or extra parking spaces usually come from guests there or people that might be staying in the park for longer than just a few days that might have an extra vehicle that ends up in there for a short period of time. But the park up in Wilsonville that I showed you there has a few extra parking spaces scattered out around it just for that same type of purpose.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Other questions?
One last question,
Go
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
Dan, I had not heard of the term flare paving or whatever was just said. But that doesn't seem to be in here as part of the design standards that I can see. And it sounds like maybe that's something we should consider.
It could be. We didn't go into that level of detail in the internal design of the park. I assume that what Mr. Grenz is referring to is just a turning radius at where
Correct.
where the individual space meets the drive through the park. I've been in parks where that's provided. I've been in other parks where it's a nice sharp angle on the paving and you pull forward and back in. Again, we didn't go to that level of detail on how the park gets designed as much as lay out the framework for spacing and road width and things like that.
I just think for keeping Stayton and the business beautiful, if you're going to kind of shorten up that distance in the road where it's going from 16 for this this example to 14, but that this flare thing is helpful. I mean, I've never driven a huge RV, obviously. Not obviously, but I have never driven a huge RV. I would just think that we would want to try and make sure that we're having an RV park that could potentially come in, have these standards that will make it so that, you know, if they put a curb there, that people aren't hitting the curb all the time, and now we have this broken down RV place, or they're tearing up all the landscaping all the time, and you know, it's just more enforcement that we're going to have to do later when we say, hey, you guys aren't keeping your stuff up. I just am thinking if we build in something just as simple as that into line, I don't know where it is, G, I think, in section 4, that it may be helpful, just those couple extra words. Just a thought, but I am no expert.
Any other questions? Okay, Mark?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Any other public testimony? Someone else want to speak to this?
Give me some artwork here, and then I'll be back to get this.
Oh, I get one too. It's for
Thanks, Dan.
Looks like a basketball court. Yeah?
It is.
Oh, no, I'm messing with you. I'm sorry.
We don't have all that.
Okay.
Well, good evening. My name's Dan Morgan. I live at 2195 Cardinal Avenue here in Stayton. And first off, I'd like to disclose that I do not have an RV. I've never been in an RV park, so please acknowledge that. And some of my questions may seem, or some of my comments may seem completely irrelevant to the problems here. But I did work 10 years, my last 10 years of retirement for a highway construction company, and our last project was a light rail along the Portland 205. And in that, we had parking lots to consider, parking various sizes of vehicles to consider in that. So I did have a little bit of experience in that. My main concern, the 10 years that I did work there, was safety, because safety to me is a very, very important project. So if you could get your, what do you call it? The ordinance, and go to page 4, section 8, which says about the RV entrances from the RV. I don't see anything that says that the RV, let's say that the mayor and Brian were coming with 2 RVs and they both turn in and pull in, and probably the registration booth would be right close to the entrance. They would park there and go in and so forth to inquire about it. The mayor wants to see the dog park. Because he got to make sure that Gus is happy with it. So they go off tracing down to see the dog park, and here comes David and Paige in their 2 RVs, and all of a sudden they can't get into the entrance because the mayor's still down at the dog park. Well, I think that there should be at least 2 sites by the registration area that give off the road parking, so that if I come with my RV from a day trip and want to get back to my spot, I'm not sitting out on Fern Ridge waiting for the mayor to get back and give me easy access. Also, here comes Paige and David with their RVs. They can't get in, so they stop on Fern Ridge. Now they're blocking traffic and so forth. So I think there should be also a widening of Fern Ridge at that entrance with a staging area for a couple more RVs, so that you're not restricting traffic by there, you're not, emergency traffic can get through, and still you can hopefully have a flow. Now let's say the mayor comes back and Gus didn't like the dog park, so he decides to leave. You need an exit real close there that he can get back out, that he wouldn't loop around the black road that I have in my drawing here. I realize this isn't the scale. I realize it'd be a lot bigger than this, but if you go to page 5, and I should have brought my glasses. I guess. No. It's where, right in the middle of the page here, pedestrian walkway are provided, and I think that should be, it says if pedestrian walkways are provided. I think 5-foot pedestrian walkways should be a requirement. I didn't, in reading through this, didn't see anything that said pedestrians should not be walking on the right-of-way or on the roadway. And to me, that is a very safety issue that could come up. You've got grandma in her wheel walker and another little kid on a tricycle and somebody walking a dog. They should not be walking on any of these main roads that supply area going into the parking areas. So the reason I drew this up, and it's pretty rough and so forth, but the black would be, say, a main roadway, and the orange would be the pedestrian walkways. You could put a 5-foot walkway around the outside perimeter of the area. It wouldn't be to put a 5-foot walkway beside that traffic area. You still have that potential that some little kid or some animal or something is going to dart out in front of an RV. If you have the walkways where they could walk out of their RV and walk to walkways that then you could use the crosswalks to get across the heavy traffic. They could be signed, they could be painted, striped, they could be lit at night, and I think it would really reduce the possibility, heaven forbid, if there would be an accident in an RV park. Probably if you went on Google and searched the United States, maybe there wouldn't be any show up, but I would hate to have Stayton neglect putting something this serious in their ordinance and then having an accident happen, having litigation my tax dollars would go to the litigators. I'm sure the developer wouldn't want his money, earned money, going to litigators, and that could be something that could really be avoided. I know it's an additional expense, but I feel it's a very safe. I think that no one should, like I said, walk out on the roadway itself. They should walk down to crosswalks to go to the various areas throughout the park. There would be areas where you would probably have to have a 5-foot walkway by a roadway. For example, if it was a drive-through spot where a big RV towing a utility or a vehicle has to pull through, then at one end or side of it or the other, you would need the 5-foot walkway. But I think in the contract that the renter or the user would have to sign, you should specifically make it his responsibility to notify his people that are staying with him and any guests that he has come to that they would not walk across, only at the crosswalks. They would not travel or ride their bikes or whatever up and down the roadways. I think especially after dark, after night, even well lit, you wouldn't have safety clothes on, the kids wouldn't have, the dog on a leash would maybe wander out and about, and so I think that I can't stress enough that 5-foot walkway may need to be available to every site, one way or the other. I know it's a little bit of an inconvenience to have to walk up to a crosswalk, but in the turn, I think it would be beneficial. The only other thing I have is I do think I love Gus, and I do think he needs a dog park, and I think a dog park should be mandatory. A fenced-in area where the dog could go relieve itself, or it could have some recreation, some fellowship with other dogs off the leash, and that the developer should actually supply waste control bags at several spots throughout the you know, if my neighbor, if I'm camped there and my neighbor wakes me up at 7 o'clock in the morning, said, "Your dog came over here last night and relieved me beside my RV." And I said, "Well, my wife forgot to pack the bags. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do about it." I think that should be an added expense that the developer should provide to the park itself. And I think that's about all. Like I said, I just hate to see anyone injured if it can be prevented. I hate to see my tax dollars go to lawyers or negotiation if something that critical would ever happen. Let's hope it won't. And I think that's about all I have. If anybody has any questions, I could try to answer them, and I'd hope you would consider at least the recommendation that restricts people from walking on that roadway, and the 5-foot walkways could go against that outside fence. That would save the developer the money of landscape and irrigating against that outside fence. Yes, it would cost him monies to put that walkway in, but I think it'd be well worth that investment. So, any questions at all, or?
Dan, I just hope Gus doesn't get the blame for holding this up if it does.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public testimony? Someone else? I see a stirring in the back there. A familiar face. Gentlemen, hi.
Hey, Bill Berman, 4490 Silverton Road, Salem, Oregon. I've been running an RV park for over 25 years, so I've got a lot of knowledge of the functionality and how it works, and it flows out there. And great job. This is like way closer as far as, you know, specifics for design standards. I just had a couple of comments, really nothing much. It was brought up, you know, on 4F, 25 feet between RVs. Well, in my head, if I do the math, and I have a 30-foot spaces, and I have an 8-foot RV with no slide, I got 22 feet between RVs. And so I would hate to see something in standards that create a potential conflict. What I would recommend is 15 feet between RVs, or just get rid of that altogether, and RVs will park on the designated pads only, okay, where they're at, where they belong. Because what you'll see when you pull in, all the hookups are to the driver's side. Everybody will park tight on the driver's side to get their power and water and sewer and everything hooked up. The space width is the space width. So whatever is in between there is there. So you're really setting that spacing with the width of the space itself. So I would either say, reduce that down to 15 or just get rid of it. You're really driving that number by the width of the spaces that are there. 4J, I thought that had gone away. Providing picnic tables for each site. It's just overly burdensome and kind of getting in the weeds of running an RV park. Don't need a picnic table at every space. The reality is the vast majority of them are not going to be used, and they're going to take up room that people want to use for other purposes. So I would ask that be eliminated. And what's really scary to me is I would be shocked if the fire marshal would allow any kind of fire pit or in an RV site. They're propane. If you ever seen one burn, it's not a good thing. We don't allow fireworks. We don't allow any kind of outside burning. On and on and on. Yep, you can have a little gas barbecue and stuff. That's fine. That's something that you supply, not that the park supplies. So there again, I would ask that we just eliminate that altogether. Line J. And then what was brought up earlier was the 180-day stay. That creates concern for me. Not that I object to a 180-day stay. RV parks, and I think people miss this, we are under tenant landlord, just like an apartment. That is the section of the code that we're under. If somebody says, I don't want to leave, and I walk and I give them their violation, I go to Salem, I'm sitting in the courtroom, I don't know how that turns out when I say, oh no, Fred over here, no, he's a great guy, love him. He's a wonderful, guy to have around, pays his bills, takes care of everything. He's got to leave because, well, City of Stayton says you can't be here but 180 days. And I just don't know. I mean, I'd really have to talk to some attorneys and what have you ahead of time and to see how that works out. And I'm just throwing that out there as a concern that I would have to look at, real hard to do that. The traffic issues coming in that were brought up. Remember that the facility building typically is going to be in the center. It'll be the entranceway, which will be a two-way road. There will be a designated check-in area that everybody can drive around. You're not backing traffic out of the park. It's not a rock concert. 100 people don't show up. It's just not the way it works. And when it's time to go and you don't want to stay because you didn't like the dog run or lack of a dog run or something, you just loop around to the exit and you're gone. Again, I think it's getting in the weeds too much to designate border walkways, and in the contract you're staying here, that's the border walkway you have to use. It's what level of policing? In my experience is people walk where they want to walk. They're not going to walk where I tell them to walk, and they're going to go typically the shortest route possible. What we do have, and that we enforce really strictly, is 5-mile-an-hour speed limit. And we get after that. You get 3 write-ups for speeding, you're out of here. And typically 1 a year we've got a boot, and then people get the idea that nope. And There's where we create that big buffer. And there's just not that much foot traffic. You know, it's not like downtown walking around the streets and what have you, and there's not that kind of vehicular traffic out there. And the same thing with dog waste. You know, if somebody makes a mess and you come and complain to me, they get wrote up. Right? Their third write-up, they're asked to leave. You know, 3 write-ups in a year, see you later, bye. So, you know, it's an enforcement thing. And oh, by the way, the staff shows up and cleans it up for you. You know, takes care of that, whoever's making the complaint. We take care of that and you know, deal with it. But in general, I think it's well thought out and well done, and I know the planners have done a tremendous amount of work on this, and I've watched it evolve in a good way. So, you know, good job, guys. Any questions for me?
One. Bill, how do you folks in the Silverton Park, I'm guessing that's where you are?
No, it's in Salem.
Oh, okay. All right. How do you deal with this long-term perpetual tenant?
We
just don't, huh?
We don't.
Okay.
The evolution within Salem went just like this. Right? The park at first had this, you know, you can't stay a long time. But then it's like, well, gosh, okay, so I leave a week and I come back, or I leave a day, or I pull out on the street. You know, you guys, this code actually, you know, specifies that. The Salem code didn't have anything on it. So we kind of went round and round about that a little bit, and it's like, okay, we're doing our best. And finally, the city of Salem just, you know, do we care if it's, you know, Fred that's in that site, or if it's Ed or Martha or whomever, right? Do we really care? No.
Okay.
You know, and the reality is that your longer term people, you know, are way less problem. The maintenance issues we have, the loud parties, the noise, the folks that are out at the bars coming back in drunk, those are your short-term people. They are really, you know, you got to pay attention. Your long-term people, it's their community, and they like it and they take care of the place, you know, and yep, the owner has to be the sheriff to keep the standards, that's for sure. And you watch that and deal with it, you know, at the owner level, because it's in your self-interest. Because you let a place go sideways, you're not going to get market rates for your rent. You have to take care of your property if you're going to maximize your revenue and hopefully make a couple of dollars running the place.
Okay. One more real quickly. Let's say there are age restrictions on RVs.
Mm-hmm.
One comes in under 10 years old, but then it stays. And it stays, and it stays. At some point,
They need to get a new RV.
okay.
You need to fix it up. And as much as you know, initially I will tell you that I didn't like that concept, because the guy could have this 30-year-old Airstream. It's just gorgeous, you know. He's that old guy that's out there polishing and doing, but no, you can't stay, you know.
Yeah.
Not long term. You can stay like daily, weekly, but not as a monthly. You know, you can't stay. Versus a newer rig that somebody just doesn't care about, you know, and they trash it. But what I have found is that the age restriction in the long run is better, because I don't have to have that conversation over, oh, you got some, you know, this issue or that issue or what have you. It's just a hard thing that in the long run keeps the standards up,
Okay.
which is a good thing.
All right. Good. Any other questions for Mr. Bergman? Okay. Thank you. Other public testimony? Anyone else? Okay. Let's go back to questions from the council. Anything?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, go ahead, please.
So I have a question for you, Dan. If we were to remove that 180-day requirement, first off, have you heard of that being an issue with the landlord-tenant stuff? I thought this was run as like a business versus landlord. I guess I'm not remembering that it was under landlord-tenant law, if we talked about it before. So my question is, are you aware of the 180-day limit before someone checks out for 7 days and then comes back? Are you aware of that being an issue with landlord-tenant law at all?
I don't know enough about landlord-tenant law to know whether that would be an issue. However, we are looking at this type of use as a commercial use. It is not a residence. It is where you come to vacation. My concern, as you know from the initial discussions that we had at the Planning Commission, is that recreational vehicles are not built to the same design, construction, and life safety standards that dwellings are designed and built to. They are not built to be long-term, permanent places where people live. I lived in an RV for 6 months, and while there was a window with a little latch that said fire exit on it, I'd be hard-pressed to fit through that thing should I not be able to get out the door. And that was when I was quite a bit younger and was able to fit through a window a little better than I am now. An RV park is not a substitute for a mobile home park or an apartment complex. There may be parks that people stay year-round for years and years. But the Planning Commission, in their deliberations, decided that they did not want RV parks in Stayton to be someone's residence, and therefore set the limit. The initial drafts that the Planning Commission was looking at had a 120-day limit and didn't say that you had to leave, but said that if a unit was in place for 120 days or more, then it needed to be hardwired and hard plumbed, just as if it was a building, and you didn't just connect it with a garden hose and a plug-in electrical socket. And that's part of why you've got the photographs of Mr. Grenz's unit that was submitted at the Planning Commission hearing, and as a result of that testimony, they decided to get rid of that requirement and instead just set a limit of you're there for no more than 180 days, and then you need to check out and go away and be someplace else for a week, because this is not a place where people live. And so therefore, I would think that the typical residential landlord-tenant legal relationship would not apply. Everybody should know going in, checking in, that they may not be there for more than 6 months. I mean, that should be part of the rules that are posted when you register.
Other questions? Should we go to a staff summary?
Oh, wait, sorry, I thought you were going to ask another question. Mr. Mayor.
More questions, okay. One of these days.
One of the gentlemen, the last gentleman that was speaking, suggested for F, wait, I'm sorry, 4J, there's no need for the picnic tables. Could you give us a little bit of insight as for like the planning commission, as to why they wanted those, or why they thought they were like absolutely necessary that each space needed them?
I think the planning commission's point of view was, again, this is not where someone's coming to live. This is where they're coming to vacation. Every campground and RV park that I've ever stayed in has had picnic tables and either a fire ring or a barbecue thing at each site. That includes RV parks and campgrounds where I've stayed in a tent and where I've stayed in an RV. And it includes private parks, it includes publicly owned RV parks, it includes state park campgrounds, etc. So that's the reason it's in the code, or the proposed code, and why the Planning Commission chose to keep it.
Mr. Mayor, one more question.
One more. No.
Forgive me if I missed it, but there isn't a speed limit in here. Is that something that is, that's just like the park operator should be or is in charge of setting that? Or
Yes,
is that something that we
it
should
would be.
consider?
It's something that you could consider placing in, that would require signs to be erected establishing a speed limit in the parks. It's not something that came up in the Planning Commission's discussions. It's not something that I think I saw in any of the other codes that I looked at when I was beginning to pull together other examples of municipal codes on RV parks.
Okay. I'm sorry. I said one more question, but I do have one more. To the point of walkways, when you were looking at other standards, so this one, ours says if pedestrian walkways are provided, did other standards that you saw, did they say that they had to provide pedestrian walkways? Do you recall?
I don't recall that other codes specifically required walkways. The language that was presented to the Planning Commission by staff said that pedestrian walkways shall be provided and required them to be the 5 feet width. That was quite a bit of discussion at the Planning Commission hearing, and the Planning Commission chose the language that you have in front of you.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, please.
This one is, I guess, to Keith or Dan, really, because these are, even though we're trying to make it seem as though they are not residences, 180 days is a really long time. That's 6 months. That's a long time to be vacationing somewhere. And then to only have to require that they leave for 7 days, where hypothetically they could just park on different streets for 7 days and then come right back. What are we doing in this ordinance to protect these people that are unofficially residents, I guess, because they're using it for commercial use? I don't see any protection. What are we doing? I don't see anything in here that's helping them if it's 27 degrees out. I don't see anything in here that says that, they have to have any type of insulation provided, or that needs to be provided on site by the park manager, or they're still going to be residents. Like, people are going to use them that way. They're going to figure it out, and we have to plan as if the worst case scenario. If we don't plan for the worst case scenario where someone is, working the system so that they can keep staying there, we need to make sure that they're staying there safely. So my overall question is, what are we doing to make sure that we're protecting these temporary residents in this ordinance when it comes to sewage, water, insulation, basic things that a normal mobile home park or other park that would allow permanent residence of RVs. What are we doing that that mimics that? I don't see it.
You don't see it because we're not. The occupants of an RV park will be providing their own shelter. They are the ones that are responsible for it. I will be pulling up in my rig if I'm the customer or the resident of the RV park. What we're doing here, this is a land use code. We are setting out the parameters for how a site is designed and constructed. We are establishing some minimal operational standards, but they're really standards that will go into the design. And yes, if we get a spate of a week where the temperature doesn't get above freezing, which does happen occasionally around here, I would be very concerned about my water supply when it's coming through a 5/8 inch rubber hose that's screwed onto a faucet over here and then goes to my, the water supply valve on my rig. I think that's part of the philosophy, again, of why, I understand what you're saying, but that we're looking at this, this is a commercial use. We're not setting up places for people to live. If we did, we'd be calling them a mobile home park, and we'd be applying the building code standards and et cetera, and we've got other provisions for that. But ultimately, it's not the park, the adequacy of the individual units is not up to the park owner and is not up to the city. It's up to the owner of that unit, because they're the ones bringing it into the park.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, another question.
Yes. So I'm a firm believer that just because it's legal and it's okay doesn't mean it's right. And I feel like we can do better here. I don't know exactly how we would go through that, but I guess my question is for Chief over there. In the mobile home park that we have, where there are RVs currently, what do we have any standards for those? Like, do we get calls ever? And I hate to put you on the spot, but can you remember any calls that we've gotten for, like, maybe you guys go there more often because people's health aren't as good because they're living in these cold RVs that don't have insulation?
Not that I know of down there at the one that I believe you're talking about,
Yeah.
but we have gone there because of, the fire department has gone there because of fires, because of poor electrical connections. People plugging their poor quality cords into the outlets, and their trailers catching on fire. That's happened. I know that for a fact.
Thanks.
Anything else, folks?
One more question.
Okay.
Have we reached out to our city attorney about, this 180-day restriction and landlord-tenant laws, and if they apply or don't apply based on how we're setting this up?
I have not.
We have not reached out to the city attorney, and he does not review these ordinances by policy.
Okay. We're to go to a staff summary. Dan? Mr. Fleischman, please.
The Planning Commission, as I said earlier, spent at least 5, maybe 6 meetings talking about this issue, came up with a set of draft regulations that they put out to public hearing. based on the testimony at that public hearing, modified them mostly as has been discussed so far in this hearing, and sent them on to you with a recommendation for approval. Regarding, I would like to respond to some of the comments that have been made, the testimony that you heard, and also to follow up on some of the questions councilors asked. In thinking about the adequacy of the road width, 14 feet is the width of a lane on the interstate highway. So if vehicles are traveling 70 miles an hour in a 14-foot lane, then a 14-foot wide roadway, particularly with one-way traffic going 7, 12, or even 15 miles an hour in an RV park, should be plenty wide. The issue will be turning radii and how sharp the curves are for these bigger rigs. The idea of requiring some parking spaces at the registration area is something that just didn't come up in our discussions. It may make sense to do, but I think that on any site, even something as small as 3 acres, the designers of parks know how to lay them out, and again, every park I've been in has that type of entrance area where there's space to pull over while you're registering and other vehicles can get in and get out. The Planning Commission did include in the requirements a requirement for pet waste bag dispensing stations throughout the park. And if the council is concerned about the 180 days, that number could be reduced. As I said earlier, the Planning Commission was originally looking at a 120-day stay, and then saying if you're going to be there, you need to be there for real and not have temporary removable connections to sewer and water. So if you are concerned about an RV park morphing into a residential use, then you could consider reducing that length of stay. With that, you've got the ordinance in front of you. You could choose, if you wish to continue the public hearing to another date, or adopt the ordinance as presented, or modify the ordinance as you see fit. And if you'd like to see changes, we can draft them up and bring them back to you at your next meeting.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Before we get caught up in either closing the hearing or continuing it, I wanted to ask if anyone in this group wants to continue the hearing. Otherwise, I'm going to close it.
Can I ask a question about that?
Well, we have been in hassles over closing hearings and then people wanting to keep them open, and so I just want to ask in the nicest possible way, does anyone want to continue this hearing? If not, I'm going to close it. Going once?
Can I ask you a question
Yes,
about an
yes.
option? Like, so if we were to close it and ask for things to be changed, then would there be another hearing after the changes are made, or how does that work?
Mr. Fleischman, can you help me on that?
Sure. If you make substantial changes to the code, to the proposed code, that, for instance, included subject matters that were not part of the draft, then I would suggest that you continue the hearing or reopen the hearing. If you are going to, for instance, just to pick an example, change the minimum width requirement for individual spaces in the park from 30 feet to 28 feet, or 32 feet, then there's no reason to continue or reopen the hearing.
I don't want to be sorry I asked that question, but
So I guess it really depends on what types of changes that you might have in mind, whether you think the hearing should be continued or not.
But if we deliberate about it, and then we, like, if we close it and we deliberate about it, and then if substantial changes come out of that, then we'd be able to reopen it then?
Correct.
Okay.
okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing and go into council deliberation. Go ahead, folks.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
the one modification that I would ask for is that we have the manager of the park be required to keep a log from the time the person came in to the 180-day point.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I agree with that, and that the park owner or manager would be required to submit that to the city for review. And I don't know what number of days that would be, but
I think it'd just be, yeah, the request to the city would be to make it available at their request.
Yeah, I would suggest, rather than requiring a park owner to submit their guest registration records, that they just be available for inspection upon request from city staff.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
That was my
Mr. Mayor,
Yes?
that leaves zero accountability. Zero accountability for the park manager, zero accountability for the city to be making sure that people are safe and following these things that we're putting into place for a reason. Like, why put them into place? Who's gonna ask for them? When are they gonna ask for them? Are we gonna arbitrarily just drive by and go, oh, look, there's someone there that I think's been there for a while? That doesn't have any metric to it.
If this thing passes, I'm going to assign someone on the council to monitor the development of this, if a park were to go in, and it would be one of their sort of prescribed duties to spend some time there every 6 months or so.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes?
I respectfully would ask that we just keep this professional. I understand what you're saying. I'm talking about safety right now.
I know, and I appreciate that. And I might even take that on as a task for myself, but it can be looked. It can be taken care of.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Dan, what's the feasibility of just conducting some kind of audit quarterly on these parks just to ensure there's nobody who's staying past 6 months? Is that feasible?
Yeah, that's feasible. That's a matter of the enforcement staff setting up a tickler file that quarterly or every 4 months or whatever that they need to, assuming we have a park, that they need to go out and check the registration log and see if there's anybody that's been there too long.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other questions or thoughts?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes?
It was brought up that the 25 feet between RVs is not a feasible thing. Is it, I would suggest that the suggestion of either taking it out or changing it would be something that we should consider, because we don't want to put something into place that then isn't going to work. Is that, or can you give me an idea of what they were thinking when they put that in? Because what the gentleman said that works at and manages the park is that that's not even a feasible thing.
Well, that is what he said, but these are two different minimums or minima.
Okay.
If you assume that the RV pad, parking pad, is going to be centered within the RV space, then you're going to need a space wider than 30 feet in order to accommodate 25 feet between units. But it's not that you can't meet both requirements, because they're minimum requirements. It's not like it's a maximum requirement. So it'll just take some design, and it may be that you end up with spaces that are wider than 30 feet in order to meet the 25-foot separation.
Okay, so I guess I was assuming that they would all be in the middle of the space, and so that's why you're saying there needs to be 25 feet between them, is because they're not all going to be set. Okay, I got you now.
Yep.
I'm following.
Okay.
Then disregard.
Other questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I would personally like to see the staging areas and like a certain number of parking spaces per number of sites around community use buildings be put in. I just feel like that's just part of like a livability standard. I know that, I guess that's really all I'm going to say for that.
Okay. Suggestions on how to do that? Put that in the requirements? Or is it, Dan, were those written in there somewhere, that the public building have a certain number of spaces around it? The community building or whatever?
No, there currently is not a requirement for parking spaces near the community buildings.
Okay.
There is a requirement that that community buildings, or certainly the bathhouses, so to speak, shall be within at least no more than 500 feet from any space in a park. But there is not a requirement for parking at those community buildings.
But Dan, can't all this or several of these concerns be addressed in the conditions of approval? Like the flare?
Yeah, yes, they could be, but it's hard to justify conditions of approval if they're not related to a standard in the code. So if the council wants to assure that there are going to be some parking spaces at each community building, then that should be in the code.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
So part of why I'm asking about these parking spaces is because we've recently gone through a hearing that had to do with the safety and the accessibility for firefighters to access these areas. And so I'm trying to think of how, so we don't have a problem in the future, how can we keep the person in the morning when it's like super cold outside, they don't want to walk to the restroom, and so they're going to drive their car. If there's not a place to drive down to and park, they're going to be in the lane, and then you've got people parking in these lanes, and then you can't get firefighters there if there's a fire. So I'm just trying to look at it from a safety standard of we should have this, if we're going to make policy, make good policy, and if you're not going to make good policy, don't do the policy. So we should think out all of this stuff, make sure that we're not going to be getting in trouble with landlord-tenant law, make sure that we're not going to be making it unsafe for people if they start parking on the roads. Is there a restriction in here that says no parking along the roads? Do we require them to post no parking signs on the road or on their driveway?
Okay. Let me ask a follow-up. Dan, in reviewing other parks in different areas, different states even, were there provisions made for parking along, again, around the public buildings? What did you know?
I don't recall seeing anything in the other codes that I looked at, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't there.
Okay.
That's at each space.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Being that I'm fairly new at this, sometimes I just don't know what is, where to strike a good balance between what we should be putting in here and then what is getting too detailed in what should be in here. So for instance, Dan, you mentioned the flare, and while we talked about that being a good part of design, it's not in here, but you said that if we don't put it in here and then we want to require it later on, then that's going to be an issue. So I'm just having from my perspective, I don't know enough to know what should or shouldn't be in terms of like starting to nitpick somebody so much that when they come in here and they want to put in this RV park, that they're just going to be like, you know what, this is just getting crazy what you're asking me to do. So, I mean, that's just me being, blatantly honest about my shortcomings at this point. But so specifically the flare, should that be something we are considering, among other things? And then I guess my second question while I'm speaking is, do we need to go back and consider the 180 days in terms of the landlord-tenant laws, and are we stepping on toes, especially with the new law that's recently passed? Anybody?
Are you referring to Senate Bill 608?
Yeah.
I guess I could touch on, Dan, you can talk about this too, but, the city does have an ability to do time, manner, place restrictions. In terms of the 180 days, 120 days, the intent of this is this doesn't become a residential park. It's supposed to be a commercial recreational park. And so, so we don't have some of these concerns. And then really what you're talking about then is, do we want an RV park? We have 3 of those right now. Mobile home parks, which we have 3 of right now. So I think what his concern was is he's going to have to go through the process of the enforcement actions that he would prefer not to, but that's part of what the expectation would be, and part of this would be, yeah, I understand going to court could be a hassle for him and take up his time, but that would be the expectation of what we would set as our time and our place restrictions. We can talk to our attorney, but generally speaking, the law is pretty clear, especially when you define it this way as a commercial. I think the 6 months initially was, Dan, I remember a conversation about snowbirds, but it is a long period of time. If you're going to be here to recreate, you could definitely change that. But we can check with our attorney. By his practice and policy, they do not review anything. But if we ask them, they will review it. But my anticipation would be that we would have that right and that expectation for a property owner to follow those guidelines. Dan, anything you want to?
No, I don't, again, I don't know tenant landlord law. I have read in the newspaper the new tenant protections that were added by the legislature, but I haven't looked at the bill. I don't know any more what they do than what the newspaper's written up. And again, I don't view these facilities as places where people live. And that's part of why the regulations are written, to make sure that you're not there for more than 180 days. And again, as I said earlier, if the council wants to shorten that, I'm not aware of any statutory or case law that would address that issue.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Mr. Mayor.
I'm going to invoke executive privilege here for a minute and ask Mr. Grintz.
You did close the
The
hearing.
hearing's closed.
You mean I can't do that?
No,
That's
sir.
right.
Even on executive privilege?
sir.
Yep.
Jesus.
I know you want that sort of thing. I'm sorry you don't
What's the
have.
point of being in charge of it? Anyway, I think there are answers to those questions on the parking spaces and whatnot. We may just not have touched all of them tonight, but they're out there. I think there are smart park developers that put parking spaces around the common buildings. I think there are smart developers that put flares on the egress and ingress to the parking spaces. I don't know that we have to have absolutely pinch completely tight all those areas. I think it's, a lot of it is just done because it's a smart thing to do. But I can't guarantee it. And I apparently can't ask the people that would know. I get these rules rewritten a little bit here, and or I have a little leeway on some of this. Anyway, what would you folks like to do? The hearing's closed. We can approve the first consideration of ordinance 1029. We can approve the ordinance with modifications. We can close the hearing and the hearing's closed and retain the code as unchanged.
Or another option, if you don't want to approve the first consideration with modifications, if you give me an indication of the modifications that you'd like to see, I can come back with a draft at your next meeting for your consideration. So the 2 points that I've heard brought up so far as saying, this is what I'd like to see, were from Councilor Quigley to require the management to keep records and for them to be available.
Correct.
I didn't get a good, clean feeling from the council as to whether being available means shall be submitted or just be available upon request. Secondly was to provide a number of parking spaces around community buildings. So those are the 2 notes that I managed to write down. It would be easy enough to require a radius of pavement where the individual space meets the park travelway, if that's a concern to the council.
I'd like to see that.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the ordinance with the following modification. We add a quarterly audit to ensure the 180-day consecutive limit is not overstayed.
Okay, is that the only one? The only modification? Okay.
In addition to what Dan just mentioned, or are you good?
So you're saying 1 or 2 spaces would be something?
Well, no, I didn't put it, I said a number.
A number.
Yeah.
I'd go ahead and make the following modification, also add 1 space next to it, in the event that somebody needs to use the restroom in the early morning.
Would you need 2, 1 ADA and 1 regular, or at 1 ADA spot? I don't know how that works. If it's ADA compliant.
The building official is going, if there's only 1 spot, the building official is going to require it to meet ADA standards.
Okay.
Dan, what have you got written down for modification so far?
I've got to what I've got to paraphrase Councilor Patty is to require the management to keep records of guest registration and to submit them quarterly, to make them and to have them be available for a quarterly audit.
Correct.
And secondly, that at least 1 parking space be provided adjacent to community buildings.
You got it. That's the motion.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second to approve the ordinance with modifications. Move to approve ordinance number 1029 with the following changes, which are noted in Mr. Fleischman's notes, and direct staff to incorporate these changes into the ordinance before the ordinance is presented to the city for a second consideration. Is there anything else under discussion?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I don't feel like this meets all of the things that should be changed about it. I feel like it should just be redrafted, and we should talk more about what should go in there. Yeah, I feel like the lawyer should be consulted if we're going to be putting a time limit. So when I vote, you're going to have to take that into consideration, that's why I'm voting.
Okay, that's fine.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes?
I would like to counter that by saying I think that the ordinance before us has been well thought out, and it does strike the right balance between being specific about creating a nice space for vacationers and giving some flexibility. So,
All right, thank you.
Okay, I want to make one more comment because my question was a two-part and it was only one-part question. The flares, is that getting too much into the weeds, or is that something we need to put in if we want those, if we want somebody to put those in?
I would imagine that an RV park operator would be considering that because...
Yeah, Counselor, did you hear my comments about what smart developers probably do?
I completely agree with that in terms of smart developers, but we haven't always had smart developers here in Stayton to counter that. So I just want to make sure, again, that goes back to my comment about not always knowing what, like Dan said, if we want this in there and then they come and then the site plan doesn't have it and we say, well, we want you to have it, and they say, well, it's not in your standards. I just want to make sure that we're not, and that is just an example really, but I wrote it down. So that is something that can I just get what do you think about that, Dan? Can I ask you that?
Well, I think it's always hard to thread that needle between getting too detailed and providing enough flexibility. But it's something that could easily be drafted and inserted to say that there shall be a 5-foot radius or an 8-foot radius, and I don't know what the right number is, where the individual RV pad meets the travelway through the park, if a majority of the council thinks that's something that should be in there. I agree with your comment about that while it might be what a smart developer would do, our history here is in the past, not all of our developers have been in that category. And the purpose of writing these rules, if we were counting on the smart developer to come in to do an RV park and do it right, then we don't need these rules. The reason we have these rules is we're saying if you want to come to Stayton and do an RV park, here's what you need to do. So if you want to provide that level of detail for how the individual parking space meets the travelway, then great, let's do it.
I'm sorry, I feel like we're still getting into the weeds here on this.
Okay.
I feel like this flexibility is necessary.
Mr. Mayor.
Well, yes.
I'll call for the question, please.
Okay. Question is, I move to approve ordinance 1029 with some changes, which Dan has, Mr. Fleischman has, direct staff to incorporate these changes into the ordinance before the ordinance is presented to City Council for a second consideration. Alyssa, would you poll the council, please?
Yes. Councillor Ort?
Yes.
Councillor Mullen?
yes.
Councillor Patty?
Yes.
Councillor Hook?
No.
Councillor Quigley?
Yes.
Motion passes 4-1.
Okay, thank you. All right, the council's decision may be
you have-
appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals.
Not until you get the ordinance adopted next
Next
meeting.
time. Okay. I can do more of these procedural things. It gets people stirred up. I like it. No one else does, but anyway. Okay, let's go on to the next order of business finally. A couple more hours and we'll be done with all this. Oh, boy. Unfinished business, appointment of council liaisons, staff report. Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before you is a consideration for an adjustment to the appointment of council liaisons. As it's stated in the memo, Resolution 809, which is the council rules, discusses this whole process. At your next council meeting, we will be reviewing and considering the council rules and update of those. But in the meantime, what we've been working on, and this has been an ongoing process and negotiations and discussions, and I hope we've reached a point here of working with the feedback we received from the council and all the staff members becoming really engaged and active. We have before you what we hope is kind of meets the objectives and goals of all the parties. We've made some modifications to previous proposal. We've added just a little bit of clarification on some of the headers, and then what we've attempted to do is to put examples of things that would fall under these guidelines. A couple things, which is, we know these lists won't be all-encompassing. We'll still work on communicating important things to all council members. And also, just to be clear, that just because you're not quote-unquote assigned as liaison doesn't mean that you wouldn't be welcome or encouraged to be active in an area or interest that you have. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
One of the things this should do, folks, is to bring back, not necessarily reports, but just things that you've seen and heard, meetings you might have been to, just the areas that are in your outreach, so to speak, and just make us a better functioning group. That's my take on it.
Mr. Mayor.
Somebody else, go ahead. Anyone?
Mr. Mayor, is there any way that we could just maybe send individually that email to Keith, and then he could copy and paste it and send it out as kind of a, this is what happened at these things,
Yeah,
instead of
right, sure.
doing it during a meeting?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
Is that going to be too cumbersome for you?
No, I don't think so. I don't
Okay.
think so.
Like not retyping it or anything, just...
Yeah, I think the goal too, and part of this is, as some of these things come up in different areas, we'll still provide updates and information that, cover the range that will have an interest for everybody. But as we hit areas of interest or something that having a council member more engaged and involved would be, we would have an opportunity to reach out and have somebody kind of become the expert, if you will, on that subject matter, or to be the representative for the city in that matter.
This is a really great list, by the way.
Thanks.
Thank you for that.
Staff did a lot of work, so they deserve credit for this.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I was just kind of going through here and being honest and seeing the things that I can offer to some of these groups. And, I see a few. Personally, I think the public safety, the environmental, that seems good to me. I feel like I could offer some subject matter knowledge to that tract. And then the economic development and housing seems, there's some things I have some interest in there too that maybe I could add to the table. And then also, of course, the education, social service, governmental agencies. There's also a couple groups here that I see that I could add some value to possibly. And I've already established some ties with some of these groups as well. So that being said, any other counselors here like to share some of the groups or tracks that they're interested in so that we can kind of coordinate this and set it up?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I am interested in the economic development and housing most, but I also feel with my schooling and my prior work experience in healthcare that I could also contribute, and being the firefighter, or being the daughter of 2 firefighters, the public safety and environmental group as well, so.
So we're going to have to flip a coin.
I won't fight you for it, but.
I won't fight you either, Paige.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I am interested in the educational, social services, governmental agencies for the economic development and housing.
Okay. So would you folks each like to pick one of these, and realizing that we can go across different groups? Someone one time might want to be focused on the swimming pool for a while, and then back to something in public safety or the hospital. That this should be loose enough that we can go across these lines, if you will. That's what I do.
Thanks for some deliberation at the other end of the council.
I'm just volunteering to go last.
And I'm volunteering to go last.
I'll jump on it.
Does anyone else want to monitor the fire district? I thought I'd take that only to try to form a little stronger relationship with those folks. That was just that thought. That left all the rest of the good stuff and really interesting and neat stuff for you folks.
We know that's the one you want, Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry?
We know that's the one you want.
Oh, okay.
So can we divvy these up, Mr. Mayor?
I guess
So
that's,
education, social services, and governmental agency is going to be who?
That one.
Sounded like Counselor Ort.
or
I'm sorry.
Education.
economic
The first one?
development and
First
housing.
one?
No, the first one, education, social services, governmental agencies.
Okay.
I do like that one and the economic development, but I know Paige likes housing,
So let's
That's
do one each. Let's keep going.
okay, economic development and
Yep.
housing is Counselor Ort.
Where's that? Counselor Hook?
No, Council Ort is education, social services, government agencies.
Who has econ? Who's got economic development?
Counselor Hook.
Huh.
I would like it.
Who has public safety and environmental?
I'll grab that.
David Patty, okay. Community relations and outreach.
Chris, what do you want to do?
I think Chris should do a community.
I'll take community relations and outreach.
Okay.
That leaves me, Mr. Mayor, with transportation and infrastructure again.
So you're an expert.
So everyone has something.
Yeah, and that leaves you with the fire district, correct?
You're the fire district, right?
That's all encompassing of all the liaison
Who had
positions.
the education, social services, government agencies?
That would be.
That would be me.
That'd be you.
Councilor Ort.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
yes.
We can talk about this later.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I'd like to make a motion.
I'm offering a motion. Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to appoint the members of the governing bodies to the following liaison positions: education, social services, governmental agencies to Counselor Ort, economic development and housing to Counselor Hook, public safety and environmental to Counselor Patty, community relations and outreach to me, transportation infrastructure or public utilities to Counselor Quigley, and fire district to the mayor.
Okay, thank you.
I
Is
second
there a
that.
second?
I second.
Okay, a motion and a second to appoint various and diverse counselors to various groups of community interest. What are those? Groups, agencies, oversights. There we go. Okay. Anything else on discussion?
We need to vote.
Yes, call for the question, Mr.
Oh.
Mayor.
Question? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay. 5-0, good. Unanimity, a good thing. Parking restrictions on the Village Creek subdivision. Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following your January 22nd public hearing, the City Council chose not to change the conditions of approval that were put in place on the Village Creek subdivision back in 2001 that limited parking to one side only of the streets in the subdivision. The following meeting, the council asked, Councilor Hook asked that staff further look into the options to address the issues or problems there. Staff has done so, and quite frankly, the problem, to the extent there is one, is that people want to park on their side of the street in front of their house and don't want to walk an additional 14 feet to get to the other side of the street, if that's where they have to park. If that's the problem, then there really are not solutions. The council's already decided that we can't have parking on both sides of the street. You've had that recommendation to not allow that from the police department and the fire district. And that was what the council chose to do in January. The idea of providing, we looked at, well, what would it take to provide additional parking spaces someplace? But providing additional parking places someplace is going to mean walking a lot further than across the street to get to your car. There does not appear to be a shortage of on-street parking. The problem is not that there's a lack of parking in the subdivision. There are 68 homes. Even with parking only on one side of the street, there's room for at least 85 vehicles to be parked on the street. Every house has a 2-car garage or bigger, and 2 parking spaces in front of the garage. From looking at Street View in Google Earth, and the number of homes that have either 3-car garages or have created an additional parking space, paved or graveled, besides the paved parking space in front of the garage, there's probably an average of 4 1/4 to 4 1/3 parking space, off-street parking spaces per home, in addition to the 1 1/4 or so on-street parking spaces available in that subdivision. So with that, staff recommends that no further action be taken by the city regarding this issue.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Go
Chief,
ahead.
thank you. Since our hearing on this, have you had any compliance issues in that area? And I apologize for putting you on the spot here, and if you don't know that answer, that's fine. I just was curious.
Off the top of my head, I have not heard of any compliance issues down there, and I have not heard of any people complaining from down there as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I don't think all the signs have been put up yet, have they?
I don't.
No, they have not. What we have done is put brackets in the ground where the signs will be placed.
Yeah.
They will be going up at the end of this week, and we have had calls, but there's been no complaints about the no parking signs going up.
Mr. Mayor,
Counselor?
I know previously you sent out a letter when the first signs went up. Will we be providing a letter to the neighborhood just to let them know that those are going up and the reasons why and whatnot?
You have more information than I do, Jordan. I don't recall sending a letter out, but if we did,